Hello, ladies and gentlemen. The stream worked more quickly than I expected it to. Maybe the switch to 1080p actually helped. Hello and welcome to a new episode with Mark Tech. This is not the Mark Tech check that I promised yesterday. I tried to stream yesterday, whether it was an OBS issue or my internet was way too bad. I've tuned some things down, changed some settings around, switched every other Wi-Fi receiver basically off in my home, and I hope that this stream now works. This is a stream that's happening after some tremendous days for my channel, so I really wanted to basically do some housekeeping first. But before we start, cheers. My god, those things, like, I'll have to do that. Cheers. So thirsty. Well, what has been going on with my channel, you might ask, that I have to address before we get into MKBHD's video. Not into MKBHD. It's not that kind of channel. We are a family-friendly show for the most part. Yeah, we gained a ton of subs, and Riveting Tail Chap. Oh, it's actually Riveting Tail Chap. I sometimes pronounce it as Riveting Tech Chap. It's good that I actually am fresh in the mind. Mark, how are you, man? When are you getting your iPhone again? October? I need to hear your perspective. You know I love your Stephen Hawking in-depth analysis. Well, yeah, and it's also like live stuff, right? I think that gives it like its extra charm. Riveting Tail Chap, I'm getting my iPhone somewhere between September 27th and October 23rd. And October 3rd. My god, my brain just farted completely. So, between September 27th and October 3rd. Now it works. So it's basically somewhere up from next Wednesday. For now, I've obviously done some commenting on my Apple Watch Ultra 2. This is why we'll be watching MKBHD's review of the new Apple Watches, and basically simultaneously to his perspective, I will give you my own after what is now, I put 24 hours in the title. It's actually now 48 hours. To be more precise, it's more like 56 hours. And I will try to do something similar, of course, when the iPhone comes out, like an unboxing, first impressions. And this is kind of why I wanted to do the stream yesterday, because this is when obviously fresh impressions would have been much fresher, so to speak. So let's talk quickly about the channel. Now, I recommend anybody who is here to take a look at the subscriber count. And if you're somebody who has subscribed to my channel previously, maybe you can try to remember at what subscriber count you joined this community. Well, would it surprise you to tell you? Would it surprise you if I told you that in the last 3 days I added 1.5 thousand subscribers and almost 2,000 subscribers over 4.5 days? I have no idea how this happened. We have 8 people watching, which I guess is a reflection of the incredible subscriber gains we have seen. I hope we have as many people joining, as many people commenting live. Rotating Tail Chap, what the fuck? Yeah, I guess you haven't seen it, right? When you joined, it's not 254 subscribers, it's 2.54k. It's incredible. I've been like my grandma was calling me yesterday. Was like, what happened and stuff like that. I will admit something, right? I will never buy subscribers, nor will I ever buy viewers. What I did buy a small $15 ad campaign for my Apple leather versus fine woven case comparison video, which now has almost 5,000 100,000 views. So I guarantee you that 80% of its success is not because of the advertising campaign. So this is what I did. Basically, as anybody with a new business, you invest a little upfront. You invest into the technology to produce something, and you invest a little bit into advertising. This to me is more than worth it, and I will continue doing so to very small degrees. Obviously, my financials in that regard are limited, but this is the only thing I'm doing, and I really wanted to say that before we lose ourselves into more and more growth, because I know that will create questions of why this channel is growing so quick, and to be quite honest, I don't know. Maybe it's that I've amassed like a critical mass of content, so anybody who joins right now also has a lot of older stuff to watch if they're interested. Maybe I'm hitting a specific itch in the tech community where people want to watch live streams, even if it's a VOD afterwards. I don't know. I just really wanted to share with you my excitement because I'm so fucking excited. It's gonna give us the celebrations. It's Diablo. You deserve it, brother. Feels good to be on OG to sub at you at 145 subs. Man, I actually know exactly then when you subscribed. That would have been like the 15th or the 16th of October, because I was meeting with friends that day, and one guy asked me like at what subscriber count I was, and I believe that was like 150 around that day. So without further ado, let's get into MKBHD. I will still be happy to answer any other questions you guys might have. And also, of course, this channel is now fully monetized, so you will see more ads probably, and you can now send me super chats and super stickers if you feel like it in the chat. Obviously, this is not a must. I understand that everybody's financial situation is very different. But of course, I would really welcome some support, because this will encourage me to keep doing it while I'm still finishing med school. I have no other sources of income. I have a mom who is incredibly generous. I have had what is it called? Basically like government support for gifted students. This is now over because it was time limited. So yeah, I would really appreciate some financial support directly. You can also support me on Patreon if you wish to. I have now created a cheaper Patreon subscription tier. Yeah, without further ado, let's get into MKBHD's video.
So here's the thing.
As always, please let me know in the chat if the audio quality is alright, if everything is working for you. I actually am happily looking now at my own stream, because I now know I can see that it's not like hicking up like yesterday's. It's Diablo. Oh, Diablo, my god, if you want to be the first one to send a super chat, I'll be super happy. No, this is my first stream where super chats are live at all. So if you want to get it started, I will forever remember it, dude. I promise you that. I have a good memory, and if you... and Riveting, you're saying quality is superb, which makes me also really happy. I was really playing around with OBS a lot.
We already know that these two watches, the Apple Watch Series 9 and the new Ultra 2, are not for people who already have any somewhat recent Apple Watch. These are...
Yeah, I had a Series 4. So, and not only a Series 4, but a Series 4 that I've had since day one. That you could have had a Series 4. So for basically exactly 5 years. And I didn't even have the stainless steel sapphire Series 4. What I had was the aluminum one. So it's more worn, its battery life has degraded. I believe it's at 78% battery health. It's not the cellular model, so it's by no means a high-end version even of the Series 4. Oh, I'm sorry, that's the Coke. So yeah, I fully agree. I don't think that anybody with a first-gen Apple Watch Ultra should buy it. I think anybody who doesn't have an Apple Watch Ultra should probably consider the Apple Watch Ultra 2, because the Apple Watch Ultra 2 provides you those niceties, like more future-proof performance, 64 gigs of storage, and obviously I'll go into my personal experiences with the Apple Watch as we go throughout his video.
Are iterative updates for people who don't have any Apple Watch yet, or have like a really really, really old Apple Watch, like a Series 3.
Yeah, I think Series 3 is like, well, I think Series 3 people kind of should have upgraded like by Series 6 almost. Definitely by Series 7 when Apple introduced a new display, the larger display. And then by Series 8 where we also got the first Apple Watch Ultra. So that's definitely something that would have probably been a better buy than waiting all this time. But obviously if you may be somebody who owned an Apple Watch Series 3 for as long as you could, but now like your finances drastically changed, maybe you were a student, now you're working, you have a fixed nice income, obviously I can understand why sometimes you wouldn't upgrade at what like reviewers usually recommend. And for me it's not actually that different, where I have had a very specific requirement for my Apple Watch upgrades where I want to see a decent performance increase over last gen, so that I know that my watch will be like well working, well supported for years to come. I pretty much guarantee you that by the time the Apple Watch Ultra first gen and the Series 8 are cut off, the Apple Watch Series 9 and Ultra 2 will still get support. So this is at least something for like 5, 6, 7 years. Maybe not for me personally, but that kind of long-term support is also what allows you to resell something at a better value. Look at just what a terrible market there is for the Series 3, where people are trying to sell it for pennies, as it doesn't have the latest software, it doesn't have any reasonable support anymore, it doesn't have the large screen and the performance of even the Series 4, so that makes it a huge tech challenge to actually like sell it, or even convince somebody to take it, right? Like in my family, nobody but me is that interested in tech, so usually I can give them whatever old piece of tech I have, and my mom is still happily using the Series 2, which by the way speaks of the longevity of the overall hardware, though that is the stainless steel sapphire model. She does have technically a more premium Apple Watch than I did with the Series 4, but yeah, with the Series 3 right now, if I wanted to give it to somebody, I don't know if even in my family people would be interested in it.
Something like that. So you would really have to squint and put it side by side with the previous version to actually notice what's different about it versus the previous gen. But on top of that, some of the stuff that's actually genuinely new with these watches isn't even shipping right away. It's coming later this year.
Well, later this year.
You'll see what I mean. So I'll make this review really simple for you guys here. It's just a spec bump. The app.
Yeah, and as upgrade years are some of the most popular and most well regarded in iPhone history. People remember the iPhone 4S, 5S usually more fondly than they do the iPhone 4 or the iPhone 5. Years later, usually that's not what is like the immediate reaction by the market. And I've interacted with some people who have like brain dead impressions of what S even means. They're like, oh, the iPhone 15 should have been called the iPhone 14S Pro, and I'm like, dude, like, come on, by that logic it's all like basically the iPhone 12 SSS Pro at this point. Is it just the dynamic island that will define a new generation? Is anything that still has the same looking dynamic island the same like generation and only deserves to be an S year? Apple changed the materials, the feel of the device. They gave it a 3nm processor, they gave it USB-C, they gave it USB-C 3.0 speeds. Like there's so much that has changed that. And with the Apple Watch, like, sure, it's not as much that has changed, but it's a new processor, a new ultra-wideband chip, a much brighter screen, and unfortunately still LTE. I kind of would have wished for long-term support for the Apple Watch to finally go 5G, but I guess Qualcomm doesn't make modems as small as and energy efficient as need be for a smartwatch. Hopefully that changes once we fully transition to like 3nm, though modems usually are like a node behind processors, so maybe that will take us another 2 years actually, not even like 1 year. Yikesy.
Apple Watch Series 9 is a spec bump over the Series 8, and the new Ultra 2 is the same spec bump over the original Ultra. Basically, there's one new color.
By the way, I apologize for not muting myself while drinking as often as I used to. Previously, my cable that connects to my micro USB Blue Yeti microphone is completely fucked, which means that I need to really be careful when I fondle my microphone, because that could literally result in the cable and the adapter falling out, which means that I'm muting myself less often. By the way, that band, I think that's the one I want to get. I've shown it to you. That's the Blue Flame one. It has like beautiful orange accents, right? It's the Nike one, which on the Apple Watch Ultra, obviously, like you can see that like the front button, I'll just briefly show it like this. Yeah, you can see the ring here, right, which shows that it's LTE enabled. And then you also have the action button, which is orange. So that goes really hand in hand design wise. And then I love blue, which obviously is a plus point for this specific model. And Apple uses this new recycling process, which you might have actually seen from quite a lot of like industrial designs. That's even coming to some cars I've seen, where like recycled pieces of plastic are basically randomly thrown in, which means that technically every Apple Watch band of this kind has a unique pattern. So this is something really cool that I really enjoy seeing. It's also it's still like a Nike sports band, right? So it's $50. So it's not like something you have to think about as much as like even like the trail loop. I really like how it feels. It kind of doesn't feel good against my hairy arm, to be honest, though. Like it like gets really warm underneath. And then of course I do have my own Nike band, which I absolutely love. It actually goes hand in hand with my the t-shirt that I'm wearing, or a polo shirt to be more precise. So it really fits well together. I wear a lot of black and blue, and like the stark yellowish contrast here is actually really working well with most clothes. Here the orange would primarily work because it's working together with some of the orange accents from the Apple Watch Ultra.
This pink on the Series 9 that I have, and it's pretty similar to the new pink iPhone. It's this kind of light salmon-y colored one. Aside from that, honestly, you could never even tell if someone is wearing the new watch. Matter of fact, I've been wearing around this new Ultra 2 for more than a week now. Nobody's asked about it. Nobody can tell because it looks exactly the same. There were some rumors floating around of heavily speculating on a black Apple Watch 2. You might have seen these also. And this seemed like something everybody agreed was probably going to happen. And it made a lot of sense because there's always something Apple does just to visually distinguish the new one from...
Which, by the way, I think this goes back to some of the things that I've said about the iPhone's like tri-camera arrangement, right, on the Pros, which has been unchanged since the 11 Pro generation. So that leaves us with the 11 Pro, the 12 Pro, the 13 Pro, the 14 Pro, and now the 15 Pro, which is 6 generations of iPhones having the same back camera design. And then you only have like the difference between like, is it the matte a backside or a glossy one? How exactly does it protrude, right? Apple changed some of like the glass construction behind it. The colors change, obviously, but it's not as outrageous as some people would claim is typical for Apple, right? That when Apple switched like the iPhone 12 camera, which was like horizontal, which is it horizontal? No, that's vertical, to a diagonal on the iPhone 13 series, people were saying like, oh, Apple changed it just so they could change it. And in reality, it is because the sensor was larger, so they actually had to move it a little away from it with its new stabilization magnets. But yeah, Samsung's changed like cameras around all the time, and everybody's like, oh yeah, of course they need to differentiate. But with Apple's like, well, you would expect Apple to do it. Well, no, kind of not. And the same goes for the Apple Watch. The Series 4, the Series 5 looked basically identical. Then then like even like until like the Series 7, when we finally got like the even larger screen. Like at least the Series 6 had like I believe slightly different sizes, right? That's where they changed it by 1 millimeter. But even then the overall shape stayed the same. So yeah, like people saying that they didn't expect Apple to make the Apple Watch Ultra 2 looking the same as the Apple Watch Ultra, I'm honestly kind of surprised. It shows me that you aren't paying that much attention to Apple.
The not so new one. But what I think happened was Apple got to testing it, and then they started to realize just what happens to a coated titanium on a durable
Yeah, it's important to note that the titanium on the iPhone 15 Pro is not anodized, it's coated. So technically, if you scratch it, you're scratching the paint and making the still natural titanium underneath come out. And that can look really stark, contrasty, really bad basically, because obviously if it's a big scratch, it's not something that was aesthetically designed to look that way. However, I would also say that I still think that Apple should launch a black or blue Apple Watch Ultra. Maybe they're waiting until they can get it to work with anodization rather than coating, but I don't know. I like, don't get me wrong, I really like the natural titanium look way more than I thought I would, but I still would prefer it to be black. You can see that, by the way, on my screen, that I would prefer to be black, because what can you see? Right, nothing. I have always on display turned off, even though this is the Apple Watch with literally the best battery life ever. And I still don't turn always on display, as I said I wouldn't, and as I likely won't on my iPhone 15 Pro or Pro Max. It's because I really like the clean black, like uninterrupted look of a turned off display.
focused item like a watch. So kind of.
By the way, guys, can you still let me know if the audio is all right? And basically stuff like that, if there have been any hiccups, because I haven't been checking my stream.
Similar to the new iPhone, there's these new colors with PVD coating on top of titanium.
Yeah, it's PVD coating, okay.
But it's a phone, so people put it in a case and they're a little bit more careful with it. But on an adventure watch where you expect people to run around outside and beat it up and scrape it and drag it through rocks and sand and stuff, I think they realized that might have a tough time wearing well. So we just didn't get it. Just looks exactly the same. So either way, okay, what is the new spec bump? It's the S9. The new S9 chip inside this phone, or the system in package, the SIP as they call it. Literally everything that's new about these watches stems from this S9. So first of all, it's a faster chip, which just means generally flying around.
Which, by the way, I know some people will say, well, how much faster does a watch need to be? Well, there are some things in it that are not easily like measured by CPU or GPU speeds, and we'll get to that, and I will tell you about one giant experience it has already been making over the last 2 days for me personally. But also, just as I scrolled through everything, like, I went from a Series 4, right, which had the S4 chip. Now some might say, well, that's 5 generations of chips. Of course it's faster. Well, you have to consider that technically the only like real performance upgrade in between was the Series 6. Like, Apple Watches were running still on like 7 nanometer chips throughout all that time. Like, by the time the iPhone is now hitting 3 nanometer, the Apple Watch wasn't even upgraded to 5 nanometer before now. We don't fully know the exact notes. Apple doesn't advertise similar to iPhone if it's whenever they talk about like second or third generation, like 7 or 5 nanometer. Maybe Apple switched to like 6 nanometer sometime in the last 2 years. We don't fully know. At least I haven't seen like any chip breakdowns. So what we got was a 20% performance increase in the S6 chip, and then we basically got it recycled in the S7 and the S8, and now we finally have a 30% increase, so the largest increase since the Series 4, but we also have a much more efficient chip, because it's probably using the efficiency cores of either the A15 or the A16. It remains to be seen. Apple didn't specify. And it has a much faster neural engine, for which we will talk about a little more later on. Also, just in the meantime, sensors have improved and stuff like that, so you actually need a little more performance all the time, so that you can still like sample that data really quickly. Even like audio stuff like that, it all gets improved. So I'm always happy when Apple provides improvements. This is why I'm a little sad that we still are stuck with 4G rather than 5G, and that we're still stuck with Wi-Fi 4, even though we do have something like Bluetooth 5.3, which is obviously the latest standard, while we are now close to Wi-Fi 7 to be adopted. And the iPhone just hit Wi-Fi 6E on the Pros, and we had Wi-Fi 6 for years, and then we had Wi-Fi 5 for years and years and years prior. This also makes me a little hesitant if Apple will upgrade the HomePod with the S9 chip, similar to how they brought the S8 chip to the new HomePod. Maybe they will, so that Siri can run on device, but then again, there's still the question of like, will Apple push out in like 2024 a device that still runs on Wi-Fi 4? That will definitely not be something the wider industry wants to see. At least not I want to see. I don't want to see that.
And opening and closing apps and notifications and stuff like that, all is technically faster. Honestly, not super noticeable, just because you really don't do a ton of that on the watch, and the refresh rate is exactly the same.
Yeah, and I was mentioning it versus the Series 4, right? It technically would be like around a 60% performance increase, right? Somewhere like that. Like 20% times 1.3 again, but it feels way fast. It feels close to twice as fast in some things like opening apps. Maybe also the SSD storage is faster. And there's also just a lot more versus like an older watch like mine. There are more features in the Apple Watch Ultra that are running all the time. There is like my Apple Watch didn't have cellular data, so I never had to go into like settings to manage anything there. Here it works instantaneously, and I know it didn't work quite that well on previous cellular Apple Watches. So there's a lot coming together here that I do believe if you can like get this for $800 or maybe like $750, something like that, which obviously is basically MSRP at $800, and the Apple Watch Ultra 1 that you could get in comparison is anything above $600, I would say get this one for all the improvements it has. If the original Apple Watch is like closer to $700, I would just say get the new one. It's really a no-brainer to me. Guys, what do you say? Should I react to like Telosif Drew's video on where he said people shouldn't be buying new Apple Watches this year?
What? I'll still take it. But then it's also a more power efficient chip, which you'll always love to see in a small battery gadget like a watch, but Apple actually targets the same 18-hour battery life.
I think that also comes from like advertising brighter screens. Probably you will be getting better battery life if you match performance, if you match like brightness 1-to-1 and I guess settings 1-to-1, which probably would, maybe if you turn off Siri, then the new chip is like really a ton better because it's not trying to process a lot in the background all the time. So yeah, this to me just is, it's a no-brainer upgrade. I love performance upgrades. I know it's not as flashy as some people like design updates, but like even look at something like MaxTech's iPhone 15 Pro detail breakdowns, where you will be surprised, for example, by how much better the speakers are. This is something that Apple didn't mention once on the stage, but if you're getting the iPhone 15 Pro and you're somebody like me sometimes, who likes to listen to the phone under the shower. I put it right on the window next to me, and I listen to it. And this is sounded like 10-15% louder while still being super clear without sacrificing any quality. That to me is like a no-brainer. Like, I know the money hurts, of course, if you pay more up front, but you get like longer support afterwards, which either means, as I said before, increased value if you choose to resell it, or you can keep it longer in between your family and friends, depending on how close you are with friends. I know it's obviously something different between family members than it is between groups of members of a friend group, but yeah, like, to me, like, even my old 10s is still in use. It's a 5-year-old phone. It's my mom uses it, and by the time she gets my 13 Pro Max, sometime next week or the week after, depending on when exactly I get my iPhone, my grandma will get her 10s, and that one will still serve her for like another 2 years or something like that. So no waste here.
That they always do, and instead cranks the maximum brightness of the new Series 9 display up to 2000 nits thanks to new display driver silicon. And on the Ultra 2, that now goes from 2000 up to 3000 nits max brightness. So,
it's really bright.
they
I
look
tested
great.
it, and like, I don't know if it reached 3000 nits brightness, because it is also adaptive brightness, by the way, which works really, really well. I don't think the Series 4 had it, because I turned on the light in my room, and I happened to still be watching the Apple Watch while I was doing it, because I was controlling music or something on it, and then the light switches on, and it immediately, half a second later, which, if you know how light sensors work and how often the data is sampled, that's really, really fast. It gets like brighter, and it's super vibrant. So yeah, full recommendation here. Obviously the original Apple Watch Ultra is no slouch with up to 2000 nits, but this is industry leading tech here.
The outdoors, you don't necessarily look at it right away and notice it's brighter. It's really only when you put it side by side with the last one that you can at least appreciate how impressive this is. 3000 nits is actually the brightest display Apple has ever put in any gadget they've ever made. The S9 package also includes a new ultra wideband chip that enables precision finding of your iPhone. So basically, Find My iPhone before on the watch was just pinging a sound to play from your iPhone. But now, with the watch, you can have it direct you to find exactly where your phone is. Kind of like finding an AirTag. Even more useful if your phone is like in between some couch cushions or something, or if
Yeah, and I've heard it now works from like really far away, which is a really nice quality of life improvement. It obviously previously for the Apple Watch it like didn't work, but when we just compare it over the U1 chip, which I guess Apple didn't call this U2 for obvious reasons, it's really nice just how powerful this chip seems to be. So Apple's like efforts with ultra wideband seem to really be paying off. And we always like discuss like the value of Apple devices. We like to compare benchmarks, we like to compare battery life, but then you look at individual stuff. For example, really nothing but the Samsung Galaxy S Ultra matches Apple's speaker quality, right? Anything that really can be better than the iPhone really needs to be like ultra large, like the ROG phones with like or something like that, and even they are not as good when it comes to real quality. I believe they're just louder. And then you have something like the haptic engine, which again, Samsung over time tried to create an alternative for it. It's not quite as good. Google made a decent alternative over time, but it took them a really long while. And something like the ultra wideband chip, only the Galaxy S Ultra has the ultra wideband chip in all of Samsung's devices. Guys, I'm pausing this because I think I just shit my pants. It's Diablo. Are you insane, man? Like I'm rechecking my stream. What did you send? What is the currency here? You're saying not a lot, but first one to start, something big to come. It's 100. Is it? Wait. Is it rupees or is that dirham? I cannot recognize the sign. It's probably something else altogether. And I obviously know that most of my guys don't have that much money. I did not expect you to super chat. You asked me if you should be the first, and I was like, sure, be. But I didn't expect it to happen in the first stream where I can even get super chats. That's so big, man. Please let me know, what is it? What's the currency? Where you're sending from? Obviously, it's rupees. It's rupees. Okay. Wait, what did I say? What was my first guess? It's from India, right? The rupees are from India. Or is my brain like completely malfunctioning? It's like $1. That's completely fine, man. I understand. Believe me. We all have our limits. I sometimes also only give like $2 to somebody I really like. Believe me, there's no judging here ever. Whatever amount you can give is 100% welcome. And thank you, man. And you're now officially the first super chat supporter ever on this channel. So this is really something. If there's ever like a badge that I can give you guys, I think that will require me being bigger and having more people watching the stream before I can create like channel members. Think of it like direct support through Patreon, right? But it's handled directly by YouTube. You will definitely be like, also, if I ever get big enough, it's Diablo. If you feel like it, you're definitely now invited to, if that ever happens, to be a moderator. Obviously, the chat is now small enough so that I can handle it myself. But hell, we have had some incredible growth over the last couple of days.
It's playing sound echoing in a weird way.
And I'll be like a really dirty YouTuber. If anybody wants to join the gifting stream here, now we have the engine on top, which is it's Diablo. You can put your wagon behind him.
I think this is a great ecosystem feature. I'm sure.
By the way, it's Diablo. I'm always calling you basically a dude and he, him. Tell me if that's right so that I know. Like, I know people think pronouns are cringe, but I know that 17% of my audience are now women. So now I actually have to be more careful. There was a time where 98% of my viewership were men. So I was just calling all of you people here dudes and he, him. But maybe I should be more careful with that nowadays.
We'll love it. And the S9 package also has twice as much memory built in now and a double the speed neural engine, which...
Double the speed neural engine is probably the biggest thing this year for Apple throughout all devices. It includes obviously the S9, but also the A17 Pro, which again, I know some people have been poo-pooing the A17, and I can get some of it when it comes to like efficiency. I guess I expected more from the efficiency of the A17, though it is 10% higher clocked, which would usually use like 20% more energy, right? Once you reach like the high end of the clock range, it couldn't even be like 30% more energy or something like that. But because it's a new node, it uses basically the same energy amount. So it's definitely more efficient than a 3.7 gigahertz 5nm chip would have been. But I guess we expected all maybe like another 5% more performance at the same power consumption, maybe another 5% reduction in power consumption or something like that, which could have resulted in like an hour longer battery life or something like that. But we will get to detailed battery life breakdowns afterwards, which I don't know how fresh the devices are that Mrwhosetheboss is testing, if there's any kind of noticeable background tasks still running there, but it's still interesting. I usually recommend doing battery life tests only like 2 weeks after you got your phone, maybe after you installed like the first bug fixing release. So, like in this case it would be 17.02, but it's still interesting and the results are definitely pretty favorable to the iPhone 15 series. It's Diablo, you're confirming that you're a dude, so I will happily keep on calling you a dude.
Combined is able to give you faster Siri requests, and it's able to process all the Siri requests on device.
Like, I have no idea how much faster Siri was on like the Series 7 or 8. I have tested some Series 7 devices 2 years ago. Obviously, this was before any meaningful content creation here. And it was good, but Siri didn't seem much improved over like my Series 4. I cannot tell you if there's any like maybe like cellular limitation that I was going through while testing it, so it's not as detailed. Here I have tested it with Wi-Fi, I've checked it with LTE, and I've checked it with my iPhone. Siri like recognition in terms of what you're saying is flawless and super fast, so you can really feel it working on device. But then when it comes to sourcing data, let's say you're asking for weather or a stock or something like that, this is also really fast. I assume this part of the equation was always probably not the problem. It mainly was the like your voice is being recognized in the cloud stuff and processed there. On device machine learned voice recognition is king, and I'm really happy that Apple is going for it. It's also the best for privacy and security.
Without any connection to the internet. So Siri's kind of famous at this point for occasionally just grinding to a halt and not answering questions, or just taking forever because you have a terrible internet connection. So this actually does make a big difference. Basically, asking it normal questions is pretty consistently quick. The on-device transformer model is also a bit more accurate. Now, Apple wasn't actually specific about which Siri requests are happening completely on-device, but if we just use our inferencing here, what I understand is happening is basically all of the voice processing is happening on device from the S9.
I think they confirmed that. It's probably like he's maybe going on from some earlier data. I think the video is now like 2 or 3 days old. And obviously it's based also on information that he was given like throughout, even like before the actual event, right? That's how it happens, guys. That's how they can't tell you that I've been testing something for a week, even though something has only been announced 4 days ago.
And then anything that actually needs to go to the internet to look something up, that's when it goes and does the round trip. So something like set a timer is always going to be nice and quick no matter what your internet connection is, because that's all on device. But if you ask it like, how tall is the Empire State Building, it'll process your voice quickly, but then it still needs a decent internet connection.
Let me check that out. How tall is the Empire State Building? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I guess it has now to use LTE because it's disconnected from my iPhone. And it had trouble connecting to the internet, so I guess the effect of like how you show something off is still bad. Or is it connecting to? Wait, it shows me that it's connected to my iPhone. Is that because I left Bluetooth on? Okay, it's a very specific scenario where my iPhone is actually working as a camera right now, so maybe it's like bugging out because of it again. How tall is the Empire State Building? So the voice recognition is perfect. It works absolutely live. But then you see like those little like Siri like rotations. Yeah, and she's having trouble connecting to the internet. So what I might do, I might disconnect it from the Wi-Fi, and then I'm gonna... How tall is the Empire State Building? Wait. How tall is the Empire State Building? It actually started recognizing my voice too early, so it wasn't her fault. I was pressing the button too early. No, she still has trouble connecting. I think that's always like weird when it comes to what happens if I like disconnect it from Bluetooth, I guess. I'll just zoom in here so you can actually see my watch. So Bluetooth. So if I turn Bluetooth off, I guess that should disconnect it from my iPhone, right? How tall is the Empire State Building? To do that, you'll need to be online. But I am online. My cellular is on and my cellular data is online. And my status says it's connected. Oh, okay. Yeah, guys, I've actually been correct. It was trying to connect to my iPhone Because my iPhone still has Bluetooth on. I keep the Bluetooth on because sometimes it didn't want to like recognize the cable connection with my Mac. It can work, by the way, completely wirelessly, but sometimes I just leave it on. And now it turned on LTE. So now, how tall is the Empire State Building? And it worked flawlessly right away. So guys, you have to know how to use your tech. Sometimes connectivity to your phone is actually a detriment if your phone happens to have worse connectivity in that moment than your Apple Watch. But it worked right away. Look at this. It's also like, it shows it beautifully, like the building and stuff like that. It gives you data underneath. Like, it actually works incredibly fast. It shows when it was established. How tall is Mount Rushmore? It needed less than 2 seconds, even with an image and stuff like that. So the LTE here is really good. Like, and by the way, it's off. The voice is off because that's how I like it. I do prefer like visual stuff here. So it actually works well. You just need to know. So I guess I will have to timestamp this thing as like the Siri experiment. And I see we have more people watching us once again, so I will once again recommend whoever is interested, please subscribe, leave a like. I always also recommend you chat with us in the live chat. As Josephat just said, Siri's always been like that. Well, I guess you can fight it a little bit. And of course, if anybody's interested, you can follow It's Diablo, leave a super chat or a super sticker. I will probably read your messages anyway, but if you're somebody who wants to leave like a freshly monetized channel or $1 help, that is very much appreciated. Let's continue.
To do the rest of it fast. It's also supposed to be able to access your health data and be able to submit health data from just your voice, because it's all on device and local and secure. But that's one of the few things that's supposed to be later this year. So as of right now, when I try the things that were in the keynote, I just get non-responses and errors. But then the one big feature, the one genuinely interesting new thing that stands out to me in this generation of watches as actually innovative is double tap. This double tap feature,
I agree,
is like the perfect symphony of impressive processing power and clever computation and high quality sensors, all combined to give you something genuinely new that honestly I don't actually expect other smartwatches to be able to copy, at least anytime soon. So it's just this. It's just double tapping your thumb and your pointer finger on the same side that you're wearing.
I can do this,
things on,
but I cannot do this on my Apple Watch because I do not have WatchOS 10.1 yet, unfortunately. It's actually this MKBHD review that basically confirmed that it's coming with 10.1, which actually makes it likely that we might get the first beta for this like this coming Tuesday, maybe the one after that, given Apple's usual beta release cycle, which would be really, really fascinating. Obviously, I do have a developer account, and now developer betas are free anyway, so I kind of got fucked on that. But yeah, I will definitely test it out and give you like a double tap impressions video. Maybe not a full video, but make it like a part of a video, like what I'm doing right now with my Apple Watch 40-hour impressions.
Watch later this year. So Apple actually had to ship me a separate watch running, I guess, an early copy of WatchOS 10.1. All the new watches shipping right now have 10.0, but the feature itself is simple. You raise to wake, and then you double tap your fingers together to control what's happening on the screen of the watch. This is basically most useful in instances where your other hand is full. Maybe you're carrying something, or you're walking a dog, or you're cooking and your hand is dirty, something like that, whatever. But when you actually do it, it's basically set up to either select the primary button in whatever app you're in, or advance through the stack of widgets in a Siri Smart Stack. So basically, if you're receiving an income...
I really like what Apple has programmed it for. It will remain to be seen what I actually like vibe with when I really test out the feature. If I believe that maybe Apple should have programmed it for something else than like the Siri like basically widgets underneath that you always have. Part of that has to do because Siri widgets are also something that obviously come up with your oh my god, you say Siri once and she like wants to talk across all devices. I'll have to change some settings around so it doesn't bother me. I wonder if that like works as a focus mode. Maybe I would create a streaming focus mode that happens to turn off like hey you know hey voice assistant stuff.
Call, no matter what, when you double tap, it will accept the call. It's the primary button. And then when you're in the call...
I also like have had some people asking why isn't like maybe just a single tap. I guess because a single tap like I mean it's a very visually distinct thing, right? A single tap can be just like maybe also your entire hand closing to a degree and just like your thumb and your index finger resting softly on each other, while a double tap gives the specific like quick impressions. It's kind of how like multitasking with the home button worked, right? It's a very distinctive gesture that is still pretty easy to do, and then of course it's basically like binary almost in the settings, right? Where it's like a yes or no, like turn on the phone call, turn off the phone call, stuff like that. I wonder how it works throughout every app, like workouts, and if it ever will have like wrong inputs. Because I did play around with the accessibility stuff where you can have like double tap and obviously all the other press and pinch gestures, stuff like that. I didn't like it that much. I think having just one gesture that really is contextually really easy to understand will help.
Another double tap that hits the end call button, because now that's the primary button. That's also strangely satisfying. In the past, for me, I know if...
It is. It's the one argument there is for like flip phones, right? When you close them to like shut off a phone call. And now you have this for Siri. It's basically like a talk to the hand kind of motion. I get it would be extremely rude in real life, but it kind of works for this specific thing. It's also very tactile by itself, right? You will like do the double tap by itself, and then you'll probably feel like the haptics from the watch during it. Also, now that we're doing 48-hour impressions, the haptics on my Apple Watch are incredible. Now, I know they probably aren't improved over the original Ultra 2, but they're really, really good. I guess they feel way more three-dimensional than the haptics do on my Series 4. Which makes them far more pleasing, while on the Series 4 they feel like much more like, well, basically like here I am, right? While with the Apple Watch Ultra there's far more pronounced of a difference. And it's not just a strength difference, right? I think part of this is also like the size of the watch and just how massive it is, because it's all that weight also like doing the small rumble, and you can differentiate really well between like basically what is a soft haptic or a much stronger one, a much more directional one, or a wider one. So yeah, it's really, really pleasing.
One hand is busy. It's been like a nose tap. I know I'm not the only one.
For all of us, yeah. Sometimes it has. Like you're wearing something in one hand, then you have to do this. Absolutely.
Judge me, but I'm welcoming of this sort of solution to that problem. And honestly, it's been very accurate. Very few false triggers. I know that I kind of have to give it a second once I raise to wake and then double tap, but it's consistent. It's very good. Now, the whole but actually thing about this not being new here is there was an accessibility setting called
and still is. Yeah, Apple has not removed it.
Apple Watch Series 6, which was designed for people who don't have another hand to use their Apple Watch, so they have to be able to control it with just their one hand. And so it had double pinch, it had single pinch, it had clenching your fist and double clenching your fist. From my limited experience, because I turned it on and tried it on other watches, it works pretty well when you're very deliberate about it. But The official reason why this double tap is new and therefore only available on these newest generations of watches and not the older ones is the most Apple thing ever. Okay, ready? Basically, the algorithm that is doing all of the processing from all the data from the sensors, which is the same sensors on the old watches, is so much more complicated and so much heavier now that it couldn't possibly run on an S8 or an...
Is it a tad ridiculous? Overall, yes. Could it work on the old Apple Watch in the exact same way without much fuss? Yes. How will that impact some things like battery life is probably a different issue, because if Apple wrote this algorithm specifically in mind with like a 2 times faster, way more efficient neural engine, then we don't know how that will impact it. It could still keep like running on the old algorithm basically with a little less precision, maybe with slightly slower input or something like that. But then again, for this you can go into accessibility settings and do basically exactly that. Apple has not taken it away, as far as I understand, from all the watches. It's just that the reason why they advertise it here, it's because it's super precise, it's super fun. And by the way, this is why I've been such a big advocate for accessibility features. I have said time and time again, accessibility features are features. They are not just designed for like the blind, the deaf, or like even somebody like me who is ever so slightly colorblind, as I like to say. They're really meant for everyone. You never know which accessibility feature you might really like. Even technically something like the double tap and triple tap on the back of iPhones is, I believe, considered an accessibility feature, and I've had those MFers on for years and years. And now we have actually a case where an accessibility setting evolves into a general setting, because guess what? It always was a general setting. It just was a little bit more hidden. And now that Apple has more fine-tuned it for a specific piece of hardware, well, guess what? Now it's an advertisement feature, which goes beyond most features. Most features are not that relevant to be featured in advertisement campaigns. So Apple's focus on things like accessibility are really paying off. I would say Apple has had some unique focus points over the years that are really, really paying off. Accessibility is one of them. I think nobody else does accessibility quite as well as Apple, and the integration between their products is a big part of that. The other point is sound. Whenever Apple made the original big HomePod, it really, really came with this focus from engineers and stuff like that to do so much more stuff with audio. And this is why you have now fantastic speakers across basically every Apple product, even if it's relatively cheap. Sure, maybe not on the Gen 9 Apple iPad, but on everything else, even like this speaker on the Apple Watch Ultra is pretty good. So there definitely is a lot that's paying off. Besides that, I would also add a lot of Apple's AI stuff, which is specifically designed for device features, right? Apple doesn't do generative AI or general knowledge AI in the same way that Microsoft or Google do, but so much of their like on-device handling and stuff like that, so much even like something ridiculous like the Apple Watch using the neural engine to generate an animation for the specific weather expected at your place. It's kind of unique to Apple, right? And that obviously is not just paying off in something like this, but also in something like the camera app, where Apple, I would say probably second best to Google, is doing a ton of AI processing. But I think Apple's maybe more aesthetic sense is helping them, I believe, still make better photos now than Google currently is. But we will probably expect a lot of great stuff from the Pixel 8 Pro, even though it still uses the same sensor. So it would need to actually do similar levels of software improvements as the iPhone did, because the iPhone is also reusing its main sensor.
Older piece of silicon, just the S9. Yeah. Convenient. So this is a in a month thing, as is according to the keynote. They're usually pretty good about delivering on promises like that, but as of right now,
yeah, portrait mode was a feature like that, right? In the when the iPhone 7 Plus was introduced. Portrait mode came out like a month or a little later than that with a software update. Apple is pretty good about that. I almost wonder if there's some stuff in even like the iPhone 15 Pro that probably needs a 17.1 update in general. I would say the ultra wide camera seems to be a little less optimized for Smart HDR5 from everything that I've seen, and maybe Apple can still do some software tuning for the A17 Pro chip, but those are very small, like nitpicky things. They're already pretty good. It's just, I guess they could be just a touch better.
This is not shipping with the watch. Either way, this is something both useful and clearly foreshadowing to the upcoming Apple Vision Pro, whose primary gesture will be selecting things by putting your thumb and index finger together.
Exactly. This is where, again, also accessibility features and designing for a wide range of hardware comes together to bring something very fun to an already existing product category. Double tap was like an accessibility feature. Now it's currently being designed for Vision Pro, and it made its way to the Apple Watch officially.
Honestly, it's one of the most fascinating things about this watch. But the other fascinating thing is that paired with one of these sport bands, the Apple Watch is Apple's first fully carbon neutral product.
It's also fully carbon neutral with the trail loop bands, and I think with the Alpine loops as well. It's not with the marine something, like basically the oceanic band. I guess that's because it's like really a lot of hard plastic. Well, this is obviously like a fabricy material in comparison.
Run the device for the lifetime of you owning it. That is absurd. That is extremely impressive. I'm kind of taking their word for it on their face. I do want to dig more into this later, but it's also something that I hope other companies start to copy.
I think there could be some issues with it, like maybe the estimates were going more about like for exactly how long, right? Maybe they were like, oh, Apple has to invest for like 5 years of usage, and it might not be hardcore usage, right? Maybe it's like half an hour of exercise a day, not like the 2 hours that some people do. So I would expect it definitely to be a little under of like some extreme expectation. Like if anybody were to come out and said like, oh yeah, is Apple paying for like 10 years of continued usage with the Apple Watch with like 4 hours of workouts every day at like the 3,000 nits half the time? No, it's not. Why would they need to? Most people don't use, like, look at me, I don't even have always on display on. So yeah, I think there's a smart middle ground here that Apple probably hit, and why it's now labeled as carbon neutral.
So here's the thing. You know that thing Apple's done in other product categories where they'll have a big silicon upgrade in the same old design as before, and then the next generation they'll...
You mean like the M1 Max? Yeah, I remember stuff like that. However, I would not say it's like universally true. Think of like the Apple Watch, think of like the iPad, the 2018 iPad with the A12X chip. It was both a big redesign and a big processor update. And then think the M1, which probably is the more natural successor to it. I kind of tend to ignore the A12Z Apple Watch. Obviously the A12Z Apple Watch would also hurt his theory here, but then you get like the M1, which keeps the same design, but then it's and just gives it this big chip upgrade. But then you get the M2 iPad Pro, which again keeps the same design and is a chip upgrade. Yeah, the cycles vary based on the device. I do know what he means in general.
Actually update the design of the product. They've done this with the MacBook Air, MacBook Pro, other stuff.
It's actually not that, like, it depends on what you see for like the MacBook Pro, right? Because there wasn't like a 16-inch M1 MacBook Pro or M1 Pro MacBook Pro before we got a redesign. We had a 13-inch MacBook Pro, which technically I consider basically as the step sibling of the MacBook Air. But when we got the M1 Pro and the M1 Max MacBook Pros, both 14 and 16 inch, those came with the new design. So this was a case where we got a chip upgrade, a design upgrade, and a big display upgrade with mini LED promotion. So this was actually like, this was so big that even though I had an M1 iPad Pro, which already had mini LED and Apple Silicon, I did finally upgrade my late 2012 iMac to a 14-inch M1 Max MacBook Pro that I'm currently streaming from. I do see that I have about 10% dropped frames, which is definitely better than on my last few streams, but it's still not what I want to see.
Thinking, and I'm hoping.
By the way, that's not the fault of my Mac whatsoever. It's just the internet, because like even right now I'm using 8% CPU. So if OBS really wanted more performance, it could get it.
To line up with rumors that that's exactly what's happening with the Apple Watch. This is what we've been wanting for a while. Look back at it. This watch looks basically exactly the same as last year, and that one looked just like the year before.
But we didn't have an Apple Watch Ultra the year before the year before, you know,
which looked just like the year before that and the year before.
Not technically, no. The Series 7, which would be the year before is the Series 7. While yes, it kept the same oval shape, it had a much more bezel-less screen.
Before that, same shape, same buttons, same fundamentals. And
yeah, Apple has no problem keeping a design for even 10 years if it works well. This is where people profoundly misunderstand Apple. Apple is neither a super traditional tech company in the sense, oh, we have to push out something new, nor are they one of the, like, we sit on one specific piece of hardware tech company like a console manufacturer who will sell you like almost the same piece of hardware for 7-8 years. But they also are not necessarily like a watchmaker who will sit on a design for 20 or 30 years. Right, you know what I mean? Apple is very flexible between all those modes. Sometimes they will sell you a Mac Mini with the same hardware for 4 years because they're too lazy to upgrade it. That is similar to a console. Sometimes they will upgrade an iPhone every year like crazy for some reason. Or think back to like the original iPad, right? The original iPad launched with a certain design, right? Those boxy sides, but then the curved back, pretty thick, pretty underpowered. Then the iPad 2 come out, much thinner, significantly more powerful. And then the year after that, we got the iPad 3, which, yes, had the same design language as the iPad 2, but it now had the Retina display. So Apple was happy to just churn out new iPads. And then even in the same year as we got the so-called new iPad, we also got the 4th gen iPad with a lot more performance. And we got the iPad mini. So there was another new design just a year and a half after the iPad 2 was introduced. And then the year after that, we got the iPad Air, which was significantly thinner and basically borrowed a lot of the design language of the iPad mini. So it's insane. And then after that, we had the iPad Air 2, which suddenly became even thinner because Apple believed that that was somehow necessary. I personally think 7.5 millimeters was like the perfect thickness. I don't like how thin the iPads are. I would personally prefer just super slim bezels, but like much sturdier device because it's actually a little thicker, has more structural integrity, a little more cooling for the processor, about the same battery as the device with slightly larger bezels would have, and good speakers because maybe they're not as quite as like wide reaching again if you cut the bezel a little bit, but maybe they're a little thicker, right, where the sound is generated.
I get that if it ain't broke, don't fix it. That's pretty classic, but there's been so many things that we've kind of just been waiting for / hoping for to maybe see from an Apple Watch someday.
What exactly? I actually don't remember this part of the video. I watched it like 2 days ago.
Maybe a circular redesign.
No, I don't want a circular redesign. Look at this. Like here I have a circle and then I have compilations around it because guess what? It's not just a circle. But then I could also like, what could I do here that wouldn't show too much of like my private stuff? But like even look at like the list for weather stuff, right? Look, it's super long and it doesn't lose too much data. If this was a circular watch, the only things that you could see from like left to right perfectly, like those lines, those would be just the one line in the center, maybe one right next to it. Like this is not something that, like, think of something like this. Where are the stocks, right? Look, I mean, right now it's showing 2, but I guess it could be showing more if I like turn down like the size of the font, right? It's like all of this would be lost on a circular watch. Also, it's really beautiful actually with how it displays data. But yeah, I profoundly disagree. I never want a circular smartwatch, and if Apple made one, I would probably be waiting for as long as possible until I have to get one. I would basically wear this down.
Maybe a little more classical shape. Maybe a rotating bezel like we've seen on the Galaxy.
What is the point of a rotating bezel? It's just a different interpretation of a digital crown that currently takes up less space. While if we made it like rotating, then suddenly this like protecting lip around it, sure, you could say, well, it now would be more functional. Well, guess what it also would be? It would make the bezel here even larger than it already is, right? In comparison to like the regular Apple Watch, which has like this full screen design. But also like it would be less durable because we would have a mechanical part which if you were to hit it, now this could break instead of this protective massive titanium edge that is protecting your entire screen. So no, those are not actual features. Those are just redesign nonsense. If he had mentioned stuff like blood pressure monitoring, glucose monitoring, even like blood fat recognition, which by the way, kudos to Samsung, they do have. I have found some problems with it, but I don't want to like talk about it too much because my experience with it is not deep enough and I don't want to just shit on Samsung without like a ton of data. From what I understand, it does its job reasonably well. It's not as good as like a dedicated like device for it, like a medical grade device, but then again, nothing really is if you're just doing it from the wrist, so I'm fine with some limitations.
Watch, which is sick. Maybe an actual leap forward in battery life, like
yeah, well, we'll get probably better battery life next year throughout many like the year, like next year and the year after, as Apple switches to stacked batteries. But just look at like the EV space, right? You can see that like new technologies rarely come with like a huge leap in battery density. Like, and even if they come with an increase in battery density, it's usually a volumetric density. It still increases the actual weight density, which obviously for a smartwatch, this is already pretty heavy, guys. I've gotten really used to it, and right now I don't want anything lighter. I'm perfectly fine with it. But if this was much heavier, I would have to start reconsidering it to a degree. So yeah, again, not really a relevant point.
Literally any one of those features.
I guess you could be saying he might want like Apple Watch Ultra battery life in the regular, what would be then Series 10, but that has a lot to do with size considerations, with the screen obviously being so all device as it currently is on the regular series. It's not really that realistic.
Would be the biggest update to the Apple Watch in years. But this ain't it. It's a spec bump.
Okay, and with this, I can also now focus on how I feel about this spec bump. Now, I have not bought the original Apple Watch Ultra. However, that isn't to say that I don't understand that the original Apple Watch Ultra is actually a pretty good device. Because why can't I clean this from my hair? I guess it will stay inside. So what have I found? Well, the battery life is incredible. Let me just check out. I have 88% battery life. I've charged to full tonight. I've worked out for half an hour with those. No, it's 45 minutes actually. And the day before, which again, as I've said, this is now technically a 56-hour impression. So before that, I kept them not charged. Didn't give them extra charge during the night from the first day to the second day where I had them, and then I worked out for 2 hours in them during my second day, and I went from 100% at around 4 p.m. during the first day to 62% at the end of yesterday before I left it to charge, and this is and then I obviously just reported on the usage from today. Now I've already said how bright the screen is. It's amazing. It's more than good enough, especially right now as we're transitioning from summer to fall. The other point is I've been really afraid of the crown guard on my on the Apple Watch Ultra. I thought it might prevent me from like really doing a lot with the actual digital crown and the button here. However, this was not a problem whatsoever because the digital crown, it has a much wider radius. Technically, like one like circulation does more than it does on like my Series 4, or at least it feels like it. Also, the haptics are incredible as you do it, so you really never are mistaken. Like you don't scroll and then you ask yourself like, oh, did I scroll actually or not? Like here, oh, it feels so good. It sounds so good. Maybe you can hear it through this. So yeah, I'm really happy with my Apple Watch Ultra. As I've said before, Siri works flawlessly when it's connected to my iPhone. Obviously, my experiment right now happened in a very specifically bad scenario, but obviously I have to account for some of that as a reviewer these days. Beyond that, I can obviously not make any benchmarks, but scrolling through settings, switching some stuff around worked really well. My workout was really precise. I did a crosswalk workout for an hour and 45 minutes, basically about 2 hours, and it did pretty much the same thing as the device that I was running on. The device that I was running on does not account for me being a little chubby right now, so this did correct for that. Also, it had all of my data, which I guess it got from iCloud, because and I don't mean like my messages and stuff, I do mean my health stuff, because I did not set it up as a transfer for my Apple Watch Series 4. I set it up completely new. I will have to like reset it anyway once I get my iPhone 15, so I really wanted to like invest as little effort into it as possible. But I did, for example, activate cellular on it, because that worked really well. There was like one wrong attempt that had to do with like my carrier website crashing, and then afterwards it worked completely fine. So yeah, that is basically my impression here. Even like the speaker and microphones are good, because I took a phone call with it and I tried out the siren. The siren is pretty silent, I have to say, though. I don't know if the siren is actually of good help. I guess it's better to have it than not have it if your voice really doesn't work, but I cannot think of a single scenario where my voice is healthy where I wouldn't use my voice over the siren. And I guess I don't know, like maybe if I sleep and I still want to let it turn on, maybe, I guess. But I probably would want to preserve the battery life for something else in most scenarios. Yeah, so that was it. Now we can get to the Mr. Who's the Boss iPhone 15 battery life video, which is actually really interesting. I obviously most of the data comes from the end, but I will have some comments on how he tests battery life, which it's not like I profoundly disagree, and it's absolutely his prerogative. It's just, I think, something that warrants a discussion in general. Just briefly checking my stream quality. Okay, let's get into it. If anybody is still here, I know it's now getting late for a lot of you guys, but you can let me know if the audio quality here is good, because I didn't get to test out this specific video.
Are the iPhone 15s. Apple talked about how they're the most power-efficient phones ever, including one claim that said they were up to 3 times more power efficient than their competitors.
They did not say that about the overall iPhone. They said it specifically about the 4 high-efficiency cores inside the A17 Pro, and they said that comparison specifically about the efficiency cores in like the later Snapdragon chips. However, you should need to consider that I don't know which exact cores Apple means, because technically the new Snapdragon chips have actually like different types of efficiency cores in them, and their most efficient cores in Snapdragon devices are way less powerful than Apple's 4 efficiency cores, because they have like between 2 high performance cores and 4 high performance cores on the A17 Pro. They do have I believe it's an 8-core design with like 1 high performance core, like let me just briefly, like, Snapdragon 8 Gen 2 cores. What does it say exactly? How many cores does this? It has 8 cores. Yes, I know that. Believe me, I do know that. Okay, so it has 1 prime core, which is the Core X3. It clocks up to 3.2 gigahertz. Then it has 2, which are basically middle of the road cores, which are A715 cores. They're still 64-bit and good, basically, and they clock up to 2.8 gigahertz. And then they have 2 Cortex A710 cores that support 32 bits, and then they have 3 ARM Cortex A510 chips, which are efficiency cores. Wow, that is a terrible architecture overall. This just looks like a lot of reusing old parts, like a lot of old IP. I didn't know it had 4 different core types. I always assumed it was 3 core types. I thought it was 1 plus 2 plus 5, but it's 1 plus 2 plus 2 plus 3. Yeah, and I assume that Apple's comparison is probably against the much older A510 cores here. Partially also because those cores might actually use a comparable amount of energy to Apple's efficiency cores. They just are far less powerful. So yeah, again, learned something new, I guess, here. That explains though, like the multi-cores cores in like Geekbench, like why they're relatively high in comparison to the single core results of like the A16 or the A15. I have no idea how many tasks in software on smartphones would be able though to like use all those cores simultaneously really well. So I think that explains why multi-core performance in actual real-world tests is like usually leagues ahead on iPhones. I mean, you could achieve probably a lot of high performance multi-threading here from just like that Cortex X3 chip at 3.2 gigahertz, and then the 2 like next powerful cores to it, which run it up to 2.8 gigahertz. I don't know, something about this design just doesn't appeal to me. I think like it probably is like also just so unique, right? Because we've had like big little on ARM for a long time, and Apple has been using different core types on iPhones ever since the A10 chip on the iPhone 7. and then those cores could work simultaneously ever since the A11 chip on the iPhone 8 and iPhone 10. But I like 4 core types. That's just difficult for software to interpret that. At least that's what I usually hear from like my developer friends when they talk about something like the P cores and the E cores or Intel chips. And this is, for example, why AMD gets praised for like Zen 5C being technically the same architecture as Zen 5. The only difference are like some cache counts, and obviously that Zen 5C doesn't clock quite as high as Zen 5. But it's really easy apparently for software to leverage that, and we are seeing that now on server chips. We have not yet seen them on consumer level hardware. But yeah, like 4 core types. Well, yeah, then Apple could also be just choosing whatever of the efficiency cores are like the least efficient and comparing it to their efficiency cores. They have a lot to choose from here.
But what they didn't mention is what that means for battery life. So we're going to go through a normal day of use to see how these new iPhones stack up. And while that happens, there's a few things about the batteries here that we need to talk about. So first thing in the morning, some breakfast and TikTok. I'm disappointed in myself. And let's just quickly
same. But I don't use TikTok, but I am on Twitter more than I should be.
$999 15 Pro, the $899
So what device is he using? I think I can put myself right in the bottom here. Yeah, that is good because it will show like the running app, and he is like usually like basically if you can't see his face, then you know it's underneath the 14 or the 13 Pro Max, and since those are like the older and less relevant devices, his face becomes less relevant. So I think my face is doing quite well here in the lower right corner. So he's testing the 15 Pro Max and the 15 Pro. Makes sense. The price is obviously something we know. The 15 Plus and 15, obviously those are also a new generation. Then we have the 14 Pro Max and the 14. So we don't have a 14 Pro or a 14 Plus. Kind of makes sense because those are probably the most popular iPhone 14 devices, and then the 13 Pro Max is the most popular iPhone 13 device as far as I know. So it's actually a really good selection. If you really only can test 7 phones, those are actually the 7 correct iPhones to use. No comment here. Good choice.
15 Plus, and then the 7.
TikTok is, from what I understand, not a very efficient app. It's not bad. I don't know how exactly it behaves with data collection, but yeah, I'm not a big TikTok fan in general.
99 based iPhone 15. And then as well as seeing how these new phones stack up against each other, we're also going to be able to get a really cool bit of perspective because we have the iPhone 14 Pro Max to see how the very best phone from this year will compare to the best phone from last.
Some people have said that like the 14 Pro Max usually underperforms the 13 Pro Max. I have usually found that this comes down to the 14 Pro Max. Well, the A16 is 4 nanometer versus N5P on 13 Pro Max, which is not a that much better node. You still have ProMotion. You probably cannot make sure that the 14 Pro Max always runs at the exact same refresh as the 13 Pro Max. From what I understand, the 14 Pro Max more aggressively turns on full 120 Hz mode. For anybody who doesn't understand, Apple's ProMotion is not just about high refresh rates, it's how you achieve those refresh rates. And what Apple usually does is they have a ramp up process. If you're doing something static on your screen or not touching it in any way, then the refresh rate goes down. In fact, it goes down all the way to 1 Hz. At least in always on display. In most usage, it would probably be around like 10 Hertz. If you're really doing nothing, then while watching a video that might be 24 Hertz, you would probably run at 48. Right, so that every frame has like 2 refreshes, which really helps with motion clarity and still with efficiency, even over like 60 Hertz. But sometimes when you scroll, right, it's not like it's jumping immediately from like 10 hertz to 120. It can stay somewhere around like 97, 100 or something like that, right? And it does that, like it jumps up, so it actually has a phase where it like increases its refresh rate. It doesn't like pause for like half a frame and then like goes up to 110 or hertz. What it does, it like goes from 10 to 40 to 50 to 60 really quickly. And what the 14 Pro Max usually does is it will usually do that ramp up more aggressively. So if the 13 Pro Max might max out at 90 hertz in some situation, the 14 Pro Max could be way closer to 120 hertz. It could do the ramp up even faster. Maybe it takes like half a second for the 13 Pro Max to go up to, let's say, even a full 120. Maybe it takes 1/4 of a frame of a second for the 14 Pro Max to do that. It's not an exact science, but Apple did specifically like point out that the A16 has a new display engine specifically for ProMotion and always on display. So there is a reason for why those phones will not always match battery life, even though like battery sizes are pretty identical, the chips are very close to each other, and obviously the software is pretty much the same too. You could also make the argument that the 14 Pro probably has like a little more screen area because of the dynamic island, and also like the dynamic island stuff is actually also handled by the new display engine, so it actually always has to be ready for some cool dynamic island animation, the way the static peninsula, if you want to call it that, on the 13 Pro Max doesn't have to be.
Last year, we have the base 14 to see how the base iPhones have changed from year to year, and then, of course, the 13 Pro Max, simply because that phone is the current world champion on the Mr. Who's the Boss battery test rankings. So it's just there in case we break the record.
I think he always tests with fresh devices or with devices that still show like 100 or 99% battery health. So I will just trust him that this is a 13 Pro Max that, unlike my iPhone 13 Pro Max, is not down to 86% battery health.
All right,
and that 86% battery health on my iPhone is probably wrong. It's been showing that for like 4 months. It's probably down from this.
This over, and at this point I'll normally start getting ready for the day with my favorite Spotify playlist. And this is quite an exciting result so far.
Okay, that's like the second Mr. Who's the Boss video where he does like a Rick Astley joke. Is that like a reoccurring thing on his channel? I don't watch him as much as I do MKBHD. he seems to be funny.
Pro Max is in first place, and it's trading blows with the current king, the 13 Pro Max. I would say that I care more about the battery on these iPhone 15s than I have on any other iPhone I've tested before, for the simple fact that this is the first time that it's not just about you. Thanks to the long overdue USB-C port, which cannot just receive...
Yeah, I completely disagree with that. I don't think that charging other devices should have any consideration of how large of a battery Apple puts into their iPhones. There's a reason why Apple has not enabled reverse wireless charging for anything but their own like power bank, basically. And the reason for that is Apple does not want overheating on an iPhone, and they don't want premature battery degradation. Now, the reason why the iPhone supports charge output is devices like AirPods don't use that much power. Even like an Apple Watch, you probably could charge up pretty well with the iPhone. The other point, though, is that because USB-C connects to more powerful accessories, right? Lightning can do that too. There specifically was a Lightning accessory at the time that actually had like it had like a USB-A out, so you could connect like a USB accessory, but then it had like another Lightning port to charge it, not just so that your iPhone could still be charged, but in fact some accessories required for charging to happen simultaneously because the iPhone was not putting out enough power. So part of the iPhone putting out more power is simply access to other accessories. It's not really a power feature to be charging your Galaxy S23 Ultra in a pinch.
but give power. You can, for the first time on an iPhone, use any extra juice that you might have to charge your earphones, to charge your watch, or just other people's phones. Which means that it's not really the case anymore that as soon as you get a day's worth of battery, that's plenty.
As soon as you get a day's worth, it's plenty. It just depends on the specific day. I would argue a lot of people would be able to get by even with an iPhone 14 with a day's for a full day, because most people work for a long part of the day, then they drive as they go to work and back, and oftentimes they will sometimes charge for another 15 or 20 minutes in the car. So yeah, most people will be able to get by with an iPhone 14. Hell, my aunt gets by with a regular iPhone 12. So my nieces get by with iPhone 12 minis. So yeah, like this saying, it's like it has more to do with what user wants to use it throughout the day than it has to do with you potentially needing to charge other accessories. I don't buy that as an argument.
Hey, every drop I can get. Okay, so we are 2 hours in now. Probably time I do some work. So this is ChatGPT 4. It's the most current version of ChatGPT. Let's ask it to do our work for us. If you haven't played around...
I've actually played around with ChatGPT in some ways. I've helped a friend of mine who is still in high school write an essay, and I actually like I wrote it, and then I let ChatGPT write something. It wasn't quite as good as what I wrote, but yeah, it definitely surprised me, and let's just put it that way.
With GPT-4, by the way, very fun tool. Like, just as a joke,
I don't actually know, like, if I use ChatGPT 4, maybe I use ChatGPT 3.5 even. I just use whatever is the newest in the Bing app. I had that like set to the triple tap back option, I believe, maybe even the double tap.
Asking it right now to give 100 reasons why cats are better than dogs, and it's doing it. So
yeah, it does. It's a lot of it will be bullshit, but if you really ask it to give like really long lists, it will be bullshit often. Not senseless bullshit, right? Not in the sense that you couldn't ever justify it, but more in like the debate bro bullshit, right? Where it's technically correct, but like, would a real person really ever say that? What it can be really surprisingly good at is, for example, like I asked it to give me the list of all US presidents sorted by their name or by the date they were born, and it put out a surprisingly long, comprehensive list. Sometimes it will like stop, right, and it will not even give you an option to fulfill it, where I'm like, dude, there are like 46, 47 presidents. I want them all, right? If you can give me 100 ways cats are better than dogs or the other way around, I want all the presidents.
yeah, the current percentage.
The US presidents, of course. I am from Germany. I am pretty US coded, as most people here would be able to tell. I probably speak closer to US English than I do actually the way I was taught, which is like the Queen's English at that point. But yeah, it's difficult to do an English speaking channel and not from a German country and not try to and not be like culturally a little different than some people would expect me to be. Like, I come from Eastern Europe. I grew up in Germany since I was 6 years old, but I am pretty US coded.
So what's very exciting here is that the 15 Pro Max is just now ever so slightly edging out every single other,
including the 13 Pro Max. So let's like recap. That's after like 2 hours and let's say 40 minutes. So that's 2 hours and 60% of an hour, right? I think that's fair. 2.6 hours. So we drained, which is actually really good because he is testing like all on display usage. It's actually pretty good, and the brightness is also decently turned up here. So we do have 77% on the iPhone 14, and we have 72% on the iPhone 15 Pro. This is one of those scenarios where we'll kind of ask, is there maybe still some stuff setting itself up on this iPhone? This looks to be a little more aggressively lower than I kind of expect it to be. I mean, it's still above 70%, so it's by no means bad. It still is like looking like a phone that will likely crack the 8-hour screen on time rating, and some of the time that was used was like TikTok, which can be pretty like demanding, because the video is like always changing and stuff like that. It's all on through the entire screen and stuff like that. The iPhone 15 Plus, 84%. I do know how this will end, so this is why I'm really looking at the 15 Plus. You can see maybe it has a little to do with like individual display differences. Did he leave like True Tone on those devices? They look noticeably like more warm than every other display here. And the iPhone 14 does not, like all the other screens except for the 14, 15, and 15 Plus are LTPOs, right? 13 Pro Max is like first gen LTPO, 14 Pro Max is second gen LTPO, and the 15 Pros have about the same panel as the 14 Pro. But like the 14 looks pretty much identical to every screen here, so I will not like blame the inferior LTPS technology here. But when it comes to the 15 and 15 Plus, I wonder if some of the settings were a little different.
On this test. What's not as
Yeah, it looks noticeably different. Like, just look at the lower bar here. By the way, I always move around my mouse cursor as I'm saying it. You guys cannot see it when I'm doing media in OBS and not like a screen capture. But I try to always like mouse plane where my mouse exactly is, where my cursor is at any given moment.
What's exciting is that the smaller Pro is in last place. We're gonna dig into this.
I mean, like, yeah. I mean, at what is now 2.7 hours, it's down by 30%, which I guess would get it even closer to like 9 hours.
In a minute, because I have a theory. But for now, time for a Zoom meeting with myself. 7 times. Yeah.
That's his work, man. That's hard, working hard for the money here.
I normally sit next to these phones whenever we're battery testing, just making notes and nursing them, like children. Okay, so why would the iPhone 15 Pro be performing worse than the iPhone 15?
Well, I mean, ProMotion accounts for some of it. Maybe the A17. I guess you could make the point that the A17 is currently not very well optimized for a lot of applications. Maybe they don't quite know how to leverage its performance versus its efficiency course. Something like that. There also is the question about like the AV1 encoder, if that might help in the future, right? Especially if some of your testing is YouTube, if that could be a big difference versus like H.265, H.264, or even software AV1 encoding especially. So that could really help. In overall, I would expect the 15 Pro in the long run, if well optimized, to outperform, I would say to match the 15 while doing more. And by doing more, I primarily mean displaying a ProMotion style image.
And more concerningly, the iPhone 14. Well, firstly...
Yeah, like... Yeah, that seems like a software issue. Like, most apps have not yet been updated for the newest iPhone generation. A lot of apps have been updated for iOS 17, but not for the iPhone 15 Pro specifically, which again is a new chip, which Apple actually said that it has like real architectural differences inside it during the keynote, so it does not seem like a raw spec bump. And also there's the question of like, how does Apple currently leverage like the neural engine? Maybe there are some bugs here where some things that should be going to the neural engine because it's much faster are still being handled by the CPU or GPU. Sorry, I think I got like a hair in my eye. So if my eye is red afterwards, know that this isn't from crying or from from being beaten up or something.
Against the iPhone 15, I think part of it is just that Apple has made the iPhone 15s better for battery life. And based on the spec sheet, you actually have this weird situation where it seems like the base 15 also has a bigger battery capacity than the 15.
Yeah, that comes from the 15 Pro having well, it is now thicker than the regular 15, so technically it could still have the same battery size, but it primarily comes from it having 3 cameras and some smaller internal differences.
15 Pro. The thing that the Pro has going for it is the Pro Motion display, which has the ability to increase the phone's refresh rate all the way up to 120 Hz, but importantly for battery, to dial it all the way down to 10 Hz when the app you're in doesn't need to be refreshing constantly. But because
I would be interested in how all those phones perform in low power mode. What is also like the output difference in terms of like brightness and like, yeah, the Pro screens would be capped at 60 Hertz, but that would match like the output, which is often important if you really want to be more scientific. I understand his test is more real life, because if you buy a Pro iPhone, you probably aren't constantly turning off Pro Motion. However, if you're talking about a long day, maybe a day that for some kind of emergency reason turned out more long than you expected it to be, then you would consider turning on a low power mode, at that point accepting 60 Hz on a Pro screen.
in this test so far, every app we've been in has had some sort of significant movement happening on screen at all times. We haven't been able to reap the benefits of that, but expect that to change as we go on. Okay, after a 2-hour call with 7 errands, I need a break.
I do want to call out my viewers right now in a positive way. We have 7 people watching, which again I did not expect for this specific stream. I do again want to say you guys all such a big thanks for all the subscribers we've added, all the view counts we accumulated over all my older videos. Even we now have 2 videos that are almost at 5,000 and 1 that is almost at 4,000. As always, please subscribe, share, like, all that fun YouTube jazz, as I call it. And of course, you can now also, since this channel is fully monetized, you can support me directly through super chats and super stickers, I believe it's called.
So let's open up the Headspace meditation app, and I want to explain
yeah, like I mean, it's a different wallpaper here, right? So but this feels like they're a little brighter than they should be. I don't know why. Maybe it's just that the exposure was like focused on one specific iPhone, and it looks like way more blown out here than it does on the 15 Pros. By the way, I was pointing just towards the 15 Plus and regular 15.
Another factor that I think is affecting the 15 Pros. Well, obviously one thing is dynamic island. The 14 and the 13 Pro Max, they don't have to worry about it. I'd imagine it's not a massive battery drain, but at the same time I'd be very surprised if it isn't contributing to at least some of the difference here, because it's essentially one extra process that has to be running in the background at all times. But what I think is the bigger thing is that the 15 Pro and the 15 Pro Max specifically are being powered by a brand new chipset.
And I don't think that chip is being very well optimized for by most apps right now. I don't think there's anything inherently wrong with the A17. There probably is less efficiency here than even Apple expected. Probably we're talking about like really first gen 3 nanometer. It actually is true what TSMC advertised in comparison to first gen 5 nanometer, which would be the A14 chip on the iPhone 12. However, you have to consider that N5P on the iPhone 13 Pro Max A15 chip, and then 4 nanometer on the A16 actually turned out into larger mid-gen efficiency jumps than some people expected, I would say. So that's actually like maybe 3 nanometer underperforms only because the previous mid-gen jumps of 5 nanometer actually overperform. So this would be like a more glass half full kind of way at looking at it.
The A17 Pro. The fact that it's a next generation 3 nanometer chip should mean pretty large power efficiency improvement.
Well, it's also probably at all times generating a little more performance, right, to open up the apps a little faster and stuff like that. I don't know how exactly scientific his testing is, if he like turns off all background tasks for his tests. For me, that actually would be pretty scientific, like, and pretty real world as well, because I do tend to turn off most background processes on a smartphone, simply because I like to know, right, what runs on my smartphone. I guess I'm pretty OCD there. But yeah, I do not think that in the long term the A17 Pro will be a negative on battery life, because guess what? It's not a negative on the Pro Max.
That's the impression that I got when I watched the event, especially since Apple explicitly mentioned that the iPhone 15 Pros had the most efficient CPU ever, and that the efficient...
What do they say? It's improved branch predictions and wider decode and execution engines. Branch prediction is also what got us like some famous security issues on Intel chips. Wider decode and execution engines, I guess that could account for some instruction per clock gains, some IPC gains, though for now performance seems to mostly scale with the 10% clock speed increase, maybe like 1 to 2% more. And they do not actually claim gen-on-gen differences here in the efficiency course. They just specifically call it out versus the competition. And as you know, the competition has not been able to win versus the 13 Pro Max or the 14 Pro Max for the most part. So yeah, it's definitely, like, especially if the iPhone had like 5,000 milliampere hours in the Pro Max, or like 4,000 in the regular Pros, forget about it. It would absolutely destroy all Samsung. It already does to the most for the most part, but that would just be like a killer blow. And if Apple moves to stacked batteries, granted Samsung will do so probably as well, which is why we are rumored to get like 300 milliampere hours more on like the regular Galaxy, I believe, and then maybe 200 more on the Plus, and then on the Ultra we are supposedly getting the same 5,000, but just also utilizing the internal space better, because we are apparently getting an Ultra redesign next year. That will definitely be interesting. If both companies have in the next year have stacked batteries, which will help with the density of the batteries, at least volumetrically. It will also help a little bit with the cooling of the battery, which could bring up both Apple and Samsung up in terms of fast charging, which currently neither one really excels at. That will be an interesting comparison.
cores in the chip, which run when you're not doing...
And of course, like next year, Samsung will be on the Snapdragon 8 Gen 3, which will be built on N4P, which sure is not technically as good as N3B, which we got here, but then N3B is also suffering a little bit from being the very first 3nm node. This is technically where we are hitting some problems, because FinFET was not really designed to go as slow as 3nm. Like, this is why Samsung by themselves is moving to 3nm gate all around, while TSMC will only be doing so with 2nm. But then again, TSMC has already also told us not to expect big efficiency gains from 3nm to 2nm. So we are kind of very much in the era of diminishing returns with process node improvements, because issues like quantum tunneling and just like uncertainty theories, once we go to the quantum realm, as we hit like close to 1nm transistor sizes. By the way, when I say nanometer transistor sizes, I do refer to the advertised sizes. I know that technically the transistors are way larger than the advertised 5nm or 3nm, but I try to use those terms because that's what people still understand. And like technically, yes, physically we should be pretty fine until we hit like 1 or 2nm, which for us in terms of advertising terms might be like 0.7 nanometer, But realistically, with the mass production for the chips that we see, with technologies like ultraviolet lithography already like showing some scaling issues, right? Ultraviolet lithography was a big improvement over what we had before, but then it came out and it pretty much was almost already maxed out. Like, sure, of course it's getting better, but not by the same rate as previous technologies were improving, because we were still at a relatively early stage in processor development. This is not the case anymore. We are now like 30 years really deep into this, and it's actually interesting to see hitting this era. This is why Apple will talk to us about improvements to things like the neural engine or architectural changes to the GPU, which include ray tracing or adding more intellectual property stuff onto the chip, like more encode and decode engines, having more separate parts for everything that runs on your device, like a separate screen display engine that specifically is tuned for technologies such as always on display. Even like it's technically not a technology, it's a feature, right? Or even the dynamic island, so that the animations there always smooth, that it always looks well without consuming too much energy. It all has to be balanced.
Anything particularly demanding are 3 times more efficient than the competition. But then, clearly, in practice, the battery gain is not as much as we initially thought it would be, just because a lot of the extra headroom generated by the efficiency is erased by the push to get more performance out of the chip.
Exactly. Okay, I think that's a very fair interpretation. And I mean, it's mostly what I have said. We'll probably have to do like another A17 like review video in which we go through like really in-depth benchmarks. I have not seen yet English speaking videos that do that. I will consider doing like a video with subtitles from like an Asian person. Again, I'm not quite sure where exactly they're from, and I cannot remember their name, so this is definitely not a racist statement. It's a stupid statement because I don't remember. But overall, I would say, yeah, it's pretty true. It's exactly what I've said, right? Apple is clocking the chip from like 3.46 or 48 gigahertz or something like that on the A16 to 3.78 gigahertz on the A17 Pro. That's a 10% increase, basically, maybe a 9% increase. And what that results in, usually if you overclock something, it does not scale linearly. If you're already basically at the end of your clock improvements, then every little bit comes at a disproportional power increase. So that 10%, if it was still an N4 chip or even an N4 chip, could result in it using like 30% more energy and something like that, also like generating a ton of heat. But because it's a more efficient chip, it now generates about the same amount of power as the previous one did during peak performance. And this is why I'm so interested about potentially low power mode, where scaling between those chips would show somewhat different results because neither one is maxed out.
Now, let's just quickly move on to cameras, which is where I spend a lot of my time.
Cameras are not like-to-like comparison points. Also, by the way, like kudos to the 15 Pro Max finding light here, which would be interesting because the 15 Pro has the same 1x sensor. I guess probably the underground, like the like whatever the material is, just looks noticeably different here. But then again, you also see more in like the ultra wide perspective. What is happening here? Well, I guess it turned on like the night sight preview right away, which again is also why it's hard to compare those phones. They will provide vastly different pictures. One might require you, like an older phone might require you to hold it for longer to focus. Like maybe the older one will require you to take 2 or 3 pictures to get the one that you wanted. So yeah, camera for battery life tests, if you're really like a pro photographer who wants to use smartphones, get an external battery pack.
Recording. Now, this hit to power efficiency is not my ideal. Like I was saying earlier, that with these phones in particular, I want that battery. But what does make me feel slightly better about this is that it looks like the battery life of the 15 series is still looking better than the battery life of the 14 series. The 15 Pro Max is beating the 14 Pro Max and the 13 Pro Max, mind you. And then the base 15 is absolutely destroying the base 14. And also, just the fact that for the first time, it looks like Apple's making a big push to try and create this exclusive lineup of console games that will also play on these iPhone 15 Pros. There's only 4 games that have been officially promised so far, but if that gets delivered on in a big way...
Well, yes, I mean, we're talking about Assassin's Creed Mirage, Resident Evil Village, Resident Evil 4, and Death Stranding, but we also have like noticeable improvements to things like Genshin Impact and Honkai Star Rail from the MiHoYo guys, so... they're definitely like, yeah, sure, those games definitely exist on both other iPhones and other platforms, but now the fact that they will get ray tracing on iPhone, I don't know if they will get ray tracing on like the Snapdragon 8 Gen 2, but that will be interesting. Also, by the way, I've seen some comparison where the Snapdragon 8 Gen 2 around matches the GPU power of the A17 Pro. And then in some scenarios comes out about like 10% slower. I think that makes a lot of sense. Some people were like saying, why is it that way? Well, the point about it is pretty simple. It's the Snapdragon 8 Gen 2 uses way more power at peak than the A17 Pro. Not to the point where obviously it will like kill your phone or anything, but yeah, peak power usage on the GPU on the Snapdragon 8 Gen 2 is higher than the A16 or the A17 Pro. Apple could have pushed both phones to even higher power usage. However, Apple would have also needed to improve cooling further for that, and that can be a little expensive, and they don't want to do that. Maybe next year when the phones get a little larger, who knows. Definitely this is one aspect that I'm not very happy about. However, I will probably be getting myself like an external fan that connects to the USB-C port, maybe one that also serves as like an external battery. I believe there was an accessory like that, and then I basically will have no problems whatsoever.
Then that would be one of the few things that would make me okay with them prioritizing the bump in graphics power instead of pushing for endurance from the last generation. I suppose the other thing to bear in mind as we move on to YouTube, which is usually where our content ends up after we film, is that while it's easy to get caught up in the chips and how much they're improving from an efficiency standpoint, the biggest effect on your battery life is going to be your screen. And while display tech is improving, it just doesn't feel like it's improving quick enough to make a tangible difference between...
Well, the 15 Pro Max and 15 Pro have the same displays as the 14 Pro Max and 14. It's LTPO Gen 2, something like that, maybe 2.5-ish, because it technically was delivering better results than most phones last year did. So I wouldn't expect any efficiency gains here for those specific models. For the 15, I actually would expect some kind of gain over the 14, because it is now a screen that is designed to run much brighter. So maybe if those brightness, well, like those brightness improvements can come from different things though. They can come from like from more cooling for the screen. They also can come from a much more efficient display engine, which, by the way, I think we've had rumors about a more efficient display engine throughout like the iPhone 15 and 15 Pro. I don't know which phone exactly got like what improvement. Maybe we'll see that in some kind of teardown, but yeah, so that would explain to it partially. If it is also a much more efficient screen by default, that will also be nice, though sometimes screens only show noticeable efficiency difference at like higher performance, right? Higher brightness, higher refresh rates. Well, if you normalize them to like, let's say 60 Hertz, 400, 500 nits, they might actually show pretty identical results.
These generations. Okay, so we're winding down the day now with some gaming, but do you notice something very interesting that's kind of been happening under our eyes with these batteries? We spent so much time talking about the Pros that we've completely neglected the 15 Plus, which is now squarely in first place. This is an impeccable performance. I'm kind of torn about it though. It's hard to be mad about crazy battery life, but
Don't be. The difference between the 15 Pro Max and the 15 Plus is not that big. You will still prefer ProMotion. You will still prefer the better main cameras. You will still prefer like the titanium feel of the device. You will get faster USB 3. Just don't.
Then at the same time, if you're someone who's paid extra to have the Pro experience, is battery not part of that? I'd consider myself a Pro user.
Part of that, yeah. Performance is also part of that. Screen technology is part of that. Cameras are part of that. Connectivity is part of that. You also have the difference between like Wi-Fi 6E and Wi-Fi 6 on top of the difference in USB throughput speeds. So yeah, there are other difference. Also, if you go back to something like the 14 Pro Max versus the 14s here, versus the non-Pro 14s, then you also get like a much brighter screens on the Pros versus the non-Pros. It just happens that this specific spec is kind of the same on the Pros and the non-Pros this year. It's usually not that. Usually the Pros will not just be higher refresh, but also brighter.
And for me, battery life is so vital that if a company came on stage one year with their phones and they just said, we've made the battery last 30% longer, they could drop the mic. They could do nothing else.
Empty warm Coke is so sad.
And that would genuinely be enough for me to say that it was a success. Okay, we've had our first casualty, and we are about to have our second.
The iPhone 14, wait, what? It had like over 9 hours on the regular 14? That's still really good. The 15 Pro, again, probably some software issues here. I would expect it to perform better than the regular 14 did. I don't know though, maybe Wi-Fi 6E or something like that is like disproportionately draining on a smaller phone, but that is highly speculative, of course. The iPhone 15 is about to run out. The Pro Maxes are doing well across the board, and then the Plus is like leading by a lot.
Bear in mind that for this test, Wi-Fi is on, Bluetooth is on, and the screen brightness is pretty high. The phone
like I don't know, like I don't think if he said if like his studios are like running Wi-Fi 6E, that could make some of the difference on why the 15 Pro underperformed a little. I don't know how exactly he matched the brightness. Maybe he did it just with like camera exposure. Like if there was just, if it's technically just 5% brighter, it could make all the difference here. And then the regular 15 is about to run out, but it's still nice to see that it overperformed over the regular 14.
So obviously the exact amount of battery life that you get will vary, but I've tried to calibrate it in a way that's more similar to a normal day in the life, as opposed to our past battery tests, which have been on the heavy.
It also happens to be that we don't actually have a 14 Pro or a 13 Pro here. Not saying they would perform worse than the 15 Pro. I kind of think they would probably perform a little better. But again, I don't know the software that he tested it yet. Like I'll actually try to look it up right on YouTube on my iPad, like Mrwhosetheboss, and look at his software. Like, did he like put out anything in the description? No, he does not. And he did not say that in the beginning either. So I don't think they were like optimized for like, I mean, it's not like 17.02 is designed to fix battery life issues, but I do prefer testing everything with the latest possible software.
Use side. I can't believe how long this has been going on for. I am genuinely exhausted. But what makes me feel slightly better is that when I do hit the hay, I can do so with...
Guys, I know that there are actually surprisingly many people still watching for what is now a 2-hour video. Please let me know if the results surprised you in any way, if you think that there's anything else worth watching for us, if you maybe know some kind of really good A17 like benchmark video that isn't Max Tech or something like that. I didn't really like their last video. I'm always really curious to hear from you guys. And girls, again, 17% female viewership.
After a pretty long trip to America. It has a cover that fits over your bed, like any fitted sheet, and what you're seeing on these phones is the app that comes with it. The key perk being it's temperature controlled. It's set to my perfect temperature, so I don't...
It's actually a nicely integrated ad. I will not be skipping it.
Worry about having a loud...
Some respect here.
And then as you go through the night, it'll automatically adjust this temperature to make sure that your body hits all the important sleep stages. And then it also tracks your sleep and gives you detailed stats about how you slept and how you could improve. Like, this is mine from yesterday. Let's not dwell on that.
By the way, like, again, I do try to the larger my audience is, I think the more important it is that I call out some truths as far as I know them. And I think that if you like, it's not something that I watched because I know what they said. I saw some of the breakdowns, and it's also something that was always clear to me, where MKBHD had, like, I believe an interview with, I believe he's called Dr. Mike, right? He's now a really famous big YouTuber. But when you actually look at sleep tracking, and he talked about it, it's really, really, like, not as useful of a feature as people make it out to be. I have always said that you should reflect on your sleep patterns through if you feel tired after getting what is supposed to be a decent amount of sleep, and not by what your device tells you. And there are different reasons for feeling tired. If you always try to blame your sleep on you feeling tired, you will sometimes ignore, like, really common issue like iron deficiencies for women, thyroid issues across both men and women. I happen to have Hashimoto thyroiditis, which is more commonly a female disease, but men have it as well. And then, of course, you can have all kinds of deficiencies and issues, of course, some of the more serious being stuff like cancer that can cause issues. So while I usually try to refrain from doing a lot of, like, medical stuff here, as you guys know, I am a med student, this idea of, like, tracking your sleep very aggressively is, in my opinion, more likely to give you anxiety if the data is not correct than or even if the data is correct, and then it will just cause you to sleep even worse because you're afraid of getting bad data the next morning. And then beyond that, there's also the point about just in general, right? Like the investment of time and effort into it, right? You have to keep your smartwatch on, or you have to buy something like a smart mattress or shit like that, which is, like, preventative in terms of, like, or at least it's prohibitive in terms of finances for a lot of people. It's also prohibitive for somebody like me who now has a really thick Apple Watch. I don't want to sleep with it. So yeah, it's don't really recommend you guys really focus a lot on sleep tracking.
It shows me how much deep sleep I had, and
the other point also for sleep tracking comes down to some of the stuff that your Apple Watch or any other device probably will not be recognizing some data points as well as it should. Usually you have, like, a breath analyzer for professional sleep tracking, so you have, like, how much time you inhale and exhale, but also there's some way to for it to think how much exactly you exhaled even without putting a mask on you. Temperature, sure, it's something that the Apple Watch recognizes, but technically the best way to measure a temperature during sleep is anally, if you can still fall asleep with a thermometer up there. It's a small one. I've worked in, like, that kind of sleep clinic for a week or two, but I did, I guess you could call it like a mini internship. So yeah, like, even if I believed in sleep tracking, I would believe in a far more precise sleep tracking. It's similar to the ECG functionality, but the difference is that the ECG functionality that your Apple Watch measures is actually not bad, right? It's just one of the 12 possible channels you could measure. So being healthy in your Apple Watch will likely show you very well that in this specific channel, from this arm to this arm, you're doing pretty well. However, if you are actually want to know about your overall heart health, you should probably get to a regular, at least like a 6-channel ECG that you get with most physicians.
What point I was awake. And if you prefer a cooler temperature, but you have a partner who likes to sleep on a stove, you can set each side to different temperatures. It's expensive, but there's few things.
Okay, yeah, I will admit this would probably be hyper interesting to me. Every woman that I've ever been together with, liked sleeping in the fucking heat while I am probably like, I'm not as much of a vampire as one of my best friends who likes to sleep in like basically a freezer, but I do like it cool and cold. My god, that might be worth it for me. How much is it? Is there a big discount if you use his fucking sponsor?
More worth investing in than your sleep. I bought this myself a few years ago, and genuinely, to date, it's been one of the best purchases I've ever made. So I'll leave a link in the description, and if you use the code BOSS, you will get an extra $200 off. Okay, time for the results.
Oh yeah, I think I remember that. I think they're like $3,000, right? This is why $200, or like they can be $2,000 if you go relatively cheap. So it's like around a 10% discount, right? I remember clicking on like a sponsor like this, and I was like, really $200 off? What is that, like 20-30% off? It was like a 10% reduction.
The iPhone 14 is in last place with 9 hours and 2 minutes. It goes without saying that this is...
So I'll just move my head around the way because this does not look to vibe with where he shows his data. So last place, iPhone 14, still over 9 hours. That's damn decent battery life.
Not bad battery life. It's
No.
far more than you get on something like the iPhone SE, and
Well, yeah, was the iPhone SE not something like delivering like 4.5 hours in his tests?
it's enough for, I would still say, 80% of phone users. Then you got the iPhone 15 Pro, which did not last as long as I hoped and I expected it would. Likely the combination of a more power-hungry...
It's actually, I would probably agree with him on the specific result. Given how his tests usually scale, I probably expected it to come close to 10 hours. Like maybe 9 hours and 45 minutes. Yeah, that definitely is a little lower, but then again, I would never say that one test on one device is like hyper representative. So maybe if we tested out more iPhone 15 Pros on slightly newer software, which again, we might get 17.1, watchOS 10.1 next week, so maybe that is when we should do the testing, especially once all devices have stopped like syncing to iCloud to get all your data in the first place and stuff like that.
chip without the bigger battery capacity of the 15 Pro Max. But
Yeah, sure. This is where the 14 Pro comparison would have been interesting, because they have very similar like battery size changes between 1 and 2% that we also get on the Pro Max, and then we also of course have the same processor difference from A16 with 6 gigabytes to A17 Pro with 8 gigabytes of RAM.
equally, I have been using this phone alongside a 14 Pro, and I found it consistently a little better, which is to say, it's plenty for most people, but it's not the phone if you're a big power user. It's almost quite funny then to see that next, lasting over half an hour longer, is the...
I don't think this is functionally very different for most people. It could probably be the difference between like an intense day and like a very intense day for some people. Definitely nice though to see that it actually reaches about 10 hours.
base iPhone 15.
Also, of course, there is the point with the iPhone 15 series that the convenience of charging is now much higher thanks to them being USB-C, while also maintaining technologies like MagSafe. So they are probably the easiest to charge iPhones in a while. Because like I don't know anybody who doesn't have some USB-C like cable lying around at this point, given how many accessories ship with them and stuff like that. This is why, for example, I've been so critical of something like the Xbox Series, which did not have any like USB-C accessories or a USB-C port on even the Xbox Series X. So yeah, I'm actually really happy that iPhones are now USB-C.
What do you think to this? I mean, it's obviously really good battery life for a base iPhone. Maybe the best ever. But am I the only one who feels like if there's one thing that the Pros should have over the base versions, that it is battery? Next up,
No,
lasting...
it should be performance. It should be performance. Performance and cameras will be number 1 and 2. You could probably like define which one matters more for you. Battery life should not be noticeably worse, which I don't think in this specific case. Like, I mean, it's measurably worse, but I doubt that it will really matter. And the other point will also be screens, but that will sometimes depend on the specific generation. I guess we'll see in 2 years, once the pros and the non-pros have LTPO, if Apple still keeps some kind of differentiation. Maybe the iPhone by Pro at that point will be 3000 nits, and maybe the non-Pro will stick to 2000 nits.
Basically an hour longer is the iPhone 14 Pro Max.
Nice, damn nice. 11 hours, more than good enough for most people. I have a 13 Pro Max which outperforms this, but has a 14% battery degradation. So I'm probably underneath this result most of the time. Probably like less than 10 hours overall, given that a lot of my usage is also pretty intense. But yeah, this is more than fine.
I've used an iPhone 14 Pro Max for the last year as my main phone, and it's been, I would say, enough for my high-powered needs almost all the time. There's definitely been a couple of occasions where if it had just lasted that extra 5% longer, I could have made a phone call that I really needed to, or got one more round of the game.
I doubt that. Seriously though, dude, you work from your studio, like what? Where are you using your iPhone that it runs low? I mean, like, I guess you could be like partying with your buddies a lot or something like that, and then you forgot to charge your phone during the day, so during the night it starts to run low, and then you have no battery life to call your significant other. That's like one scenario, but like, come on, dude. Like, you're a Brit. Like, you live in a very advanced country. You're a literal tech reviewer. Like, I don't for a second believe that you're constantly running out of juice.
In before needing to charge, but generally speaking, I've had a good experience. And then the 13 Pro Max, which on
11 hours and 19 minutes. Wasn't it like in some of his previous tests, wasn't it like somewhere like 12 hours? Like, obviously his tests are not always 1-to-1, but did he change some stuff is like my question, because maybe I'm just misremembering. I obviously don't want to imply anything. Like, I'll just briefly go to like an older video of his, Mrwhosetheboss, 13 Pro battery, and then I'll just test. That's from 2 years ago, and the king here is. It's the 13 Pro Max with 9 hours and 52 minutes from a video from 2 years ago. So his tests have actually changed in a way that more positively affects it. Like, this is 1.5 hours more battery life than he got in his testing 2 years ago from the 13 Pro Max. This is either incredible optimization on Apple's part through iOS 15, 16, and 17, or more likely this is a difference in testing. And then if I go to the iPhone 14 Pro battery test last year, exactly here, how much did he got out of the champ? Wait, the 14 Pro Max won in his test. It was 9 hours and 31 minutes, while the iPhone 14 Pro, well, the iPhone 14 Plus was actually, he didn't actually test it versus the 13 Pro Max. Okay, I got it. So it won like against obviously every other 14 series phone. Did he not test it against like the 13 Pro Max? I guess not. At least I cannot find a video like this relatively quickly. That's actually interesting. Maybe like a gap in testing or something like that. Or maybe he had a problem with the Pro Max at that point. Who knows?
Sleep has not once caused me problems. I'm not surprised to see it in front of the 14 Pro Max, since that also reflects my day-to-day experience with the phone. What that means, though, is that yes, the 15 Pro Max...
The 15 Pro Max is 11 hours and 41 minutes. So how much more is that over the 13 Pro Max? That's 22 minutes longer.
...reflects my day-to-day experience with the phone. What that means, though, is that yes...
Yes, and over the 14 Pro Max, that's 10 hours 54... versus 11 hours and 41. Well, around 50 minutes more, a little less than that. Okay, yeah, I can almost probably get behind those differences in real world. Yeah,
Max a full 35% big.
I guess really scrolling through the video now. screwed it up for some reason. OBS, by the way, like, I just want to say it, I know it's an open source software piece, and there are some different settings that I can turn on, like hardware encoding or decoding for videos. That will sometimes not work properly. Hardware decoding, encoding, decoding for the general stream, as you have known from my last couple of streams, have been causing issues. I'm thinking of switching to Streamlabs. I would have to relearn some of the UI. It's very similar but not identical. I'm afraid of screwing anything up given just how important this is becoming to me. But yeah, I'm not a big fan of OBS, guys.
Than on the smaller Pro. So the fact that it lasts 20...
Yeah, okay, it took it this long to normalize playback because for some reason the like, by the way, this is interesting to me when some people are like saying, oh, Apple will like talk about smoothness, but we had like smooth UI for like 30 years. It's just that we have now so much bloat in the operating system, right? And I always disagree with that because bloat is obviously subjective, and there's a ton of background tasks that modern systems run, and everything runs at a high resolution on screens with higher bitrate, often on a much higher refresh rate and stuff like that. But then you have OBS screwing up, like scrolling through a video, which is like, how does that even happen in the year of our Lord 2023? On an M1 Max MacBook Pro, where CPU utilization currently sits at less than 8%.
5% longer? Not a shocker. And hey, as a little sprinkle on top, I did also realize I left my SIM in this phone for the first few hours
Okay, that could slightly negatively impact it, I guess.
of this test, which will make very minimal difference when
Yeah,
on Wi-Fi,
that's
but
true.
just for the sake of clarity, it probably would have lasted an extra 5 minutes.
Probably, yeah. Probably would make it like a solid 50 to 1 hour difference versus like the 14 Pro Max.
And then, what I did not see coming, the winner
Yeah, it's a huge winner. By the way, I really like whatever he did with his camera to properly display the pink here, because in so many videos you just cannot see the color whatsoever. And you can here, so kudos for properly
of
tuning
this
his
entire
camera.
test, and by far the longest score I've ever recorded / had to sit through would be the 15 plus. And
13 hours 20 minutes basically, 13 hours 19 minutes. Good result, by no means anything to complain about it. Sure, it's a 60 hertz device, but then again, many people don't really give a shit. I would say the only problem with the 15 Plus is really the price difference. I mean, sure, it's 300 less expensive than the Pro Max, but that's only a 25% less like price reduction, plus you get half the storage, and then you've got all the other trade-offs, like the material it's built out of, from aluminum to titanium, 2 cameras instead of 3 cameras, and also usually better cameras. For example, like you don't get macro mode on the ultra wide, and the main sensor is a little smaller than on the Pro Max. You go from A16 with 6 gigs of RAM to A17 Pro with 8 gigs of RAM, which likely will mean that the devices will get 1 year longer of OS support. Then you obviously have USB 3.0 speeds for all that kind of stuff, like putting out like ProRes log files to external storage, so actual like pro functionality here. Yeah, there's plenty here for that price difference. The 15 Plus, what I'm trying to say is, should be $100 cheaper. I think for better comparison with Android devices and just for fairness towards consumers, both the 15 Plus and the 15 should be $100 less expensive, or should come with 256 gigabytes of base storage. While I know the 15 Pro Max starts at $1,000 with only 128 gigabytes, its other capabilities kind of make up for it. In my opinion, I know some people try to make the argument, if you don't care about promotion, get the regular phone. I think there's still enough in the pros beyond just promotion that really justifies the price difference, and most people should be getting either Pro.
Consider subscribing if you appreciate the effort.
And I do believe you should probably be getting the regular 15, not the 15 Plus. If you really want to save money, for one, it is cheaper, and you probably would be better off in terms of battery life by getting a 50-hour battery bank and pairing that with a 15 instead of paying $100 more for the 15 Plus. And then, of course, I would say on an even smaller screen, you'll probably care even less about stuff like ProMotion and stuff like that.
This is actually such a lead over not just the phones that finished early, but also the Pro Maxes that for about 10 minutes after this test finished, I was unironically just sitting there contemplating putting the 15 Pro Max in a drawer and switching to this.
Those are some first world problems, man.
All for it.
Okay, the video is actually over, so this will bring my video to an end. We are almost at 2 hours and 30 minutes of streaming, so the battery life lasted well here. So once again, I can only say thank you so much for all the added subscribers, all the views, all the likes, all the comments. Not that many people have followed me on Twitter, but I can kind of understand why. Twitter is a mess. And beyond that, I'm just really happy about all the changes that we're seeing on the channel. The channel is now monetized, not just for views, but now also with super chats and stuff like that. A big shout out to It's Diablo, who has been an OG supporter since like for over, like, I guess he could be considered an OG given the low subscriber count that I had there like a little over a month ago. But that was when most people joined, right? Before the LTT drama stuff, we did have no real support here, to be fully honest. And kind of anecdotally, when the LTT drama happened and I saw this topic coming up, right, I reacted to it incredibly quickly. And I came to my mom after the first stream and I was like, kind of how like, how it's like said, on this hill I will build my church, right? I said, on this video I can build my channel. She was like, what? I'm like, yeah, like this creates enough engagement. It has 15, 20 people watching live, people joining for subscribers. We gained like 1 week later, we got like our first Patreon supporter, Roland. Now we have 2, with Lucky Meat also joining the Mark Tech Pro Max tier. And then we had people who were like joining other streams beyond the LTT drama. Like, big shout out again to people like Riveting Tail Chap or It's Diablo, who've also been here during this stream. But we all have a ton of other people who are regulars. It's just I'm terrible with names and I don't want to misremember their handles. So before I mention them, I will call out everybody positively when when I actually see you back in future streams. And I think next week there should be enough material for plenty of streams. Definitely probably, but likely doing a stream already tomorrow. Definitely one between tomorrow and the day after that, and then I hope I get my iPhone as early as possible on September 27th, which would be the Wednesday. Now I do see that my stream is struggling a little bit, which I guess means it's probably just as tired as I am getting. So without further ado, thank you again so much. Please consider doing all the YouTube jazz between subscribing, liking, sharing, direct supporting, and of course I'll see you in the next stream, whatever it will be. This is Mark Tech, tuning out.